be for my pleasure, I'm going to review Earth Abides. George R. Stewart, 1949. Yeah, classic. I enjoyed reading it. It's a bit dated, but I kind of enjoyed it. And as ever, I'm just going to flick through and read you a few little bits and talk about them from a prepping point of view, because it's a prepping channel. Thus observing, he even gained a momentary ironic satisfaction by contemplating the catastrophe as a demonstration of a dictum which he'd heard an economics professor once propound. The trouble you're expecting never happens, it's always something that sneaks up on you the other way. Mankind had been trembling about destruction through war, and having bad dreams of cities blown to pieces along with their inhabitants, of animals killed too, and of the very vegetation blighted off the face of the earth. But actually mankind seemed merely to have been removed rather neatly, with a minimum of disturbance. Thus, this he thought vaguely would offer interesting conditions of life to the survivors, if eventually there were any. Yeah, it's a plague, and the story is narrated through the eyes of a young guy who's an academic. In these days, I'm pretty sure he'd be a liberal. And yeah, so we're talking about maybe 99.8% of the population dies in about 2 weeks from a pandemic. You can't really prep for that. You just have to hope you live. You might not. In fact, almost definitely wouldn't. So the protagonist is called Ish. Isherwood, I believe. Don't call the kids Isherwood anymore, eh? Ish started to say that he would give them his pistol, but checked himself. Firearms were as likely to create as to solve difficulties. In all probability, Milt had never fired a gun in his life, and he did not look like an apt learner. As for Anne, she gave the impression of being one of those excitable women who would be as dangerous to friend as to foe if she ever started cutting loose with a pistol. Kind of agree with that. A lot of people out there with firearms really don't have much clue how to use them in a combat situation in an urban environment. Other people do know how to use them, but still. So it's set in America. He actually travels across America once, and then you go across again partially via a narrated story from his kids. It's about the destruction of mankind's symbols on the planet as the survivors gradually use up what they have, but they have a lot of stuff because almost everybody died quickly, so there's a lot of stuff to be had. It's about how the ecology of the place changes, and how the ecology changing and the lifestyle changing affects the human survivors in interesting ways you may not have prepped for or thought about. There's lots of homely good wisdom in this 1949 book. Take what was good in the situation, not worrying about what might not be there. I think that's a very good thing. Figure out what you can do with what you have, and don't sit around crying wishing you'd bought an extra MRE caseload. You don't have it, you can't use it, that's cool. Maybe you can find some birch bark. Do you remember I've been saying this a long time now, that we have to live more creatively, not just as scavengers? It's bad for us, I think even psychologically. Why? I was saying this way back even at the time when Jack was going to be born. Yes, I remember. You've said it a great many times. And yet, some way or other, it still seems easier just to keep on opening cans as long as there are plenty of cans in the grocery stores and warehouses. But the end will come sometime, then what will people do? So I think that's a very important lesson for us as preppers, is the fact that we tend to store things up like squirrels for winter. And like squirrels, we often forget where we put them. And can't find stuff because we're not that organised. But at the same time, just because you have 4 years worth of food, or a year's worth of food, or 5 years worth of food, or 50 years worth of food, at some point it will run out. So right from the beginning, when it's safe to do so, look to grow, to sprout, to forage, to to harvest, even to hunt, to supplement your stocks. Don't just sit in your basement for 6 months eating 3 meals a day with snacks, which seems to be what a lot of people are prepping to do. They haven't kind of grasped the fact you have a big breakfast, you might have a snack at midday, and you might have a bigger meal at night, especially in the winter, to warm yourself up when you're sleeping. Your lifestyle will change. Your ability to feed and conveniently feed yourself will forever change in SHDF. Now, this is a slow reversion to tribal history in America because of the survivors being so few in number and so little contact with anything, that they slowly revert to basically not even a feudal, way back to a primitive hunter-gatherer society that's hunting and gathering fresh meat and fish and gathering roots and berries as well as everything else. But it's a slow transition over about 25 or 30 year time period. But water is a critical factor because this is set in California before the droughts, before climate change. The difference between having a small water supply and no water at all was tremendous psychologically. A 5-gallon can sitting in the kitchen sink took away all sense of strain. They ran out of water, the mains finally failed after about 20 years. Total pandemonium that day. Lots of plans are made to restore water and all the rest of it. But just by having a can of water and fetching the water, they lose all interest in fixing the actual problem. So they no longer have mains water, and it's never going to come back because they don't have the energy to do it. Well, they have the energy to do it. They just don't have the desire to work. Work and play have merged in the new society. And it's Ish's reaction to his kids and his relatives and how they devolve. It's fascinating because he's, I think, an anthropology student, which is why he initially decided not to kill himself or die when everybody around him died, because he thought, you know what, this is kind of fun. I'll see what happens. Now this is an interesting one because this is 1945, right? This is 1945. So listen to this and think about 2017, 2018. Ish knew, such a meal, Ish knew, ran high in proteins and fats and low in carbohydrates, but there were few carbohydrates that had been canned or bottled, and the few that you could find, like hominy and macaroni, called for heating. For drink, they had tomato juice. They ate a dessert of canned nectarines and pineapple. So this is a foraged meal that he's found, and I think what's really interesting for this for me is that tomato juice won't last because it'll rot through the tins, so it's a plot flaw. But back in 1949, convenience food was tinned. The tinned food had very little carbohydrate in it. Now I can guarantee if you go to your cupboard now and look at your tins of baked beans and you look at the tins of this, that and the other, you'll see that they've added a ton of carbohydrate. Massive loading of fructose from corn syrup. So things do change. But overall he's right. And I thought it was kind of an interesting one. You will actually find most convenience foods, you really need to dilute them out onto white rice or you'll be in trouble. So yeah, I recommend this. I enjoyed it. I'm not going to give too much away. There's some visual images in this that people rave about. Yeah, I liked it. It's a good what would happen to the fall of society in a way that allows people to keep using what we have now almost infinitely until it expires and rots. What would happen to the animals, what would happen to our psychology as people, how we interact with each other, how we are being in the world. There's quite a bit on religion. I will warn people that it's not a religious text, which is kind of interesting when you give the title, because Earth Abides is, I think, from Genesis? I can't remember. Ooh, that's awful. I will look that up and link it below. But yeah, it's a good book. I recommend it. Get a cheap copy, go to the library, listen to it online. I think listening online you might not enjoy it so much. The text is 1949, so the words are kind of big and archaic in points, as you probably picked up. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. Yeah. What would your last paragraph? Because I like to give you a taste of stuff. He fixed his eyes on the distant hills. He had tried very hard. He had struggled. He had looked to the past and to the future. What did it matter? What had he accomplished? Now certainly it made no difference. He would rest and he would return to the hills. And they, in comparison at least with the passing of men's generations, remained without changing. And if the shape of the hills was like the shape of a woman's breast, perhaps that too was not without its meaning and comfort. Then, though his sight was now very dim, he looked again at the young men. They will commit me to the earth, he thought, yet I also commit them to the earth. There is nothing else by which men live. Men go and come, but earth abides.